Thank you so much for coming to attend our International Men's Day event. I am Kait Clarke. I think most of you know me, but for those who don't, I am the Athena Swan lead for the School of Social Sciences. And I'm really happy today to be invited here to introduce our International Men's Day, which is hosted by Caroline Flurey. And thank you so much to Caroline for organizing this event. We have some exciting things coming up in the next hour and a half. I just wanted to start with a quick overview of what International Men's Day is about. I think a lot of people might not really know what we're trying to achieve with International Men's Day, what this really means to us, to men, to everyone. And International Men's Day is really about making a positive difference to the well-being and lives of men and boys. There's a lot of unique issues that men and boys face that are really our focus today. And specifically, the way that Caroline has structured and themed today is about men's physical and mental health. And there are some unique challenges that men face in terms of physical and mental health. So aligned with this, we're raising awareness of charities supporting men and boys' well-being. And I think our speaker today, Ben, also represents one of those charities. And we're promoting a positive conversation about men, manhood, and masculinity. Because if we think about it, caring for men cares for everyone. So I just grabbed some of these challenges from the UK International Men's Day website, because this is really what we're referring to when we're talking about the unique challenges that are faced by men. There's a very high male suicide rate. There's challenges in work and education in terms of attainment rates for men versus women, stress, redundancy, and unemployment. Men's health, which is really the focus today. Men are facing a shorter life expectancy, body image issues, workplace deaths. There are quite a lot of marginalized men, homeless men, boys in care, school excluded boys. There's a high rate of male deaths in custody. There are a lot of male victims of violence and crime, and there are particular challenges associated with being a male victim. Men as parents face a lot of challenges, new fathers, separated fathers. And men are also victims and survivors of sexual abuse, rape, exploitation, domestic abuse, forced marriage, honor-based crime, stalking. Oh, you just lost it.
Okay, don't you?
Don't worry, we got it back. But there are really quite a lot of crimes that men are victims of that may go underreported for various reasons, and can cause a lot of distress for the victims and survivors of those crimes. There are also boys with no positive male role models in their lives. So we're considering all these issues today and thinking about the work that we need to do for the issues that men face specifically. I just wanted to highlight some of our key achievements as Athena Swan. So I think most of you are familiar with Athena Swan. It's the Gender Equality Charter. And I've been leading the efforts for the past few years for our Athena Swan work. A lot of people think about gender equality just in terms of equality for women, but gender equality is really more broader than that. There are a lot of unique barriers and issues that women face, but there are also a lot of challenges that men face. Same for non-binary people, gender diverse people, transgender people, people across the gender spectrum. So it's not just about equality for women. When we think about what we have been doing for men, there were a couple of challenges that we faced over the past few years, looking at our school, the student population, the staff population. So one of the issues in terms of students is that our student population in the school is overwhelmingly female. So young men who are coming into university, who are facing the challenges of university for the first time, may feel like they're in the minority, in a sea of women in their classes. So we looked at this issue, and we made our recruitment materials and our processes more inclusive across the gender spectrum. We included male role models and images depicting our school to make this more accessible for men, to make them feel a little bit more welcome. And we've actually increased our proportion of male students enrolling in the school. We have male staff and students ambassadors at open days. So we really focus on that to make sure that our prospective male students feel like they are represented and feel like there's people that they can relate to in the program. We also previously had a limited involvement of men in our gender equality work. So we intentionally increased the number of male staff and student representatives on our self-assessment team for Athena Swan and involved with our gender equality work. And then in terms of our students, we also found that men were consistently underperforming in terms of academic achievement. This is a pretty standard problem that we see in universities, and especially in a female-dominated school where there's a lot of women and men can feel minoritized and underrepresented. They kind of can get lost in the shuffle and not really reach their potential academically. So we raised awareness about this issue amongst our academic personnel tutors to be able to provide more support for our male students. And we actually were able to close the gender achievement gap over a 5-year period. If you look at our gender achievement gap, going back 5 years, you'll see that we were consistently having the women outperform the men, aside from a couple anomalies here. This was 1 year where actually that the men outperformed the women, but the trend was very clearly in women's favor for the percentage of students achieving good honors, so a 2-1 or above. But when we began to implement a lot of our extra support measures for men, we actually saw a close in this achievement gap. So that was really nice to see, and we're looking forward to continuing a lot of work, understanding the challenges faced by men and what we can do to improve them. But I won't go on too much longer with our work in Athena Swan because we have a lot of exciting things going on today, hosted by Caroline. We are going to start with her book launch. So Caroline has just published this very relevant book, Talking Men's Health, Understanding and Supporting Men with Long-Term Conditions. And so she's going to be talking about that work on men's physical health. And then we also have Ben Akers, who is the co-CEO and co-founder of the Top Club charity, talking about men's mental health and how you stop men from taking their own lives. This male suicide rate, which is a very real problem that we see faced by men. Finally, we'll have an opportunity afterwards for some discussion and networking. And I apologize in advance. I do have to pop up just before 12, but I'm really happy to be here and to introduce Caroline. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so we started a little bit late because I think people were struggling to find the room, and so we may not get a chance for the networking at the end, but we'll see how things go. Here we go. Okay, so feels ridiculously indulgent to be talking just about my book, but here's the sort of oh, I don't know where that's so here's the sort of obligatory plug bit. There's a link, the QR code for the publisher, and I would suggest if you're an academic, get it through the UWE library, or anyone watching online that's also an academic, do ask your library to order a copy. It is, the publisher have priced it at a rather extortionate rate, so so please do consider getting it from the library through a download. You can also from the publisher get a printed copy of the e-version rather than the fully bound book, which is a bit cheaper. So I'll pop the QR codes up again at the end if okay. So I'm just going to talk through a kind of snapshot of each of the chapters. I won't get to the last 2 chapters. If you want to read those, you will have to read the book. So the introduction, but because it's this is International Men's Day, I'd highlight, as Kate's done, highlight some of the key stats in relation to men's health. So thanks to the Men's Health Forum for these, 1 in 5 men die before the age of 65, 40% before the age of 75. 75% of premature deaths from heart disease are male. Men account for 75% of completed suicides, and men have a 43% higher cancer mortality rate than women. And this is also, it's not just about gender, but there's a much bigger picture going on. So there's a 22 years life difference in life expectancy between the most and least deprived men. So this is also mediated by all sorts of other factors like deprivation and ethnicity and so on. So there's been a sort of traditional, or for years, there's been this idea that this is all happening because men are a bit rubbish at going to the doctor and at looking after their health. And this sort of victim blaming messaging has been prominent for a few years. But as you can see, it doesn't necessarily encourage men to actually engage with their health. So moving on from that idea that it's men's fault, in 2011, Professor Alan White and colleagues led a report on the state of men's health in Europe, which looked at data across 32 European countries and concluded that men need their own health strategy. It's not that men are rubbish, it's that health professionals aren't doing a great job at reaching out to men in the way that men will engage with. So then, a mere 7 years later, we got a men's health strategy from the World Health Organization. And then after lots of lobbying from across the men's sector, we finally got a government inquiry into men's health last year. So this resulted in a task and finish group for men's health, which I was part of, and obviously that was under the previous government, so it got disbanded when Parliament was dissolved. But the conclusion was that the committee recommends the government publishes a men's health strategy to complement rather than detract from the women's health strategy. So we're hopeful that there have been sort of positive murmurings from Wes Streeting and Labour, so we are hopeful that a similar call will be made by Labour. So my book focuses on three key aspects of data. Hopefully that'll come back. The first is focus groups and interviews that I conducted on men with rheumatoid arthritis, so a condition that causes swollen, painful, stiff joints and associated all over body feelings like fatigue. Also focus groups with men with systemic sclerosis. So this is a condition that affects more women than men, but men are dying at twice the rate of women. It's another rheumatological condition, but it affects collagen. So it causes tightening of the skin, which also affects the internal organs. And also it's a vascular disease, so it affects blood flow, particularly to the extremities. And then I also, using my work as a basis, conducted a literature review across all of the qualitative literature of men with long-term conditions. So I wasn't able to include every single paper that I came across, but I did try and include, so every single condition that I came across was represented. I particularly represented people from marginalised groups or countries other than English-speaking countries. Okay, so impact on masculine roles and activities. Men talked a lot about the loss of power, control and self-reliance that comes with being diagnosed with a long-term condition. So for example, the lads laugh at me because I used to be like them, shoot up trees, hang off scaffolding, that nimble. That's what breast cancer did to me, from that to this. And they found it really hard to have to accept help from other people, and this man talks about having to accept help from his wife. Do you know how it feels to have your wife put your socks, your shoes, help put your underwear on, got to help you get in the bathtub? You know what I mean? That it hurts. That really do hurt. Wish I could get rid of this bar. I don't know why it's there you go. So John Olaf asked men with prostate cancer, when do you most feel like a man? And all of the answers related to when they felt like a protector and a provider. So I pride myself as a bit of a handyman, lumping wood around, hammers and saws. When I'm with my granddaughter, I still feel the old function, footing the bill for near everything. I'm able to be a good provider. Working or doing normal chores, I definitely feel fully male there. So when men had to stop working because of living with a long-term condition, they really felt the impact of this on their sense of self-worth and their value. I feel my self-worth. What do? I don't do anything anymore besides live. I don't have a job anymore. It's all about my health. I go to Houston every 3 months for checkups and it's all about my health. But what am I living for? What's there left? It's not a pity party. I'm not trying to feel sorry for myself. I ask myself, what am I here for? So there's a real impact for men on their mental health of having lost jobs or having to step back from jobs due to their condition. For men that were still working, they often really felt the tug of not being able to take part in, particularly for men in manual jobs, for not being able to engage as much in the manual side of the job. And often they would use sort of banter or bravado to talk about that. So testosterone just flows through the job site. It's kind of a joke now, really, but nowadays I think of my health more today than I ever have, because it really got serious. I want to stick around. So you drill that hole, you climb that ladder. I don't care what you think of me, whatever. When I pushed him on it, he very much did care what his colleagues thought of him. But there was almost a protective role in being able to take a leadership role and ordering other people around. So men that were able to gain other parts of control in their working life coped better with not being able to engage as much in the physical side. But it was but yeah, as I said, they used all these sorts of bravado tactics to help them cope with that. It was really important to men to be the breadwinner, but this came with a burden. So this man talks about the difficulty of the responsibility of staying strong, because that's how he felt that he needed to be in the breadwinner role. There are times when I feel sick and I want to tell people I'm sick, but I don't share it with my wife or my mum. I'm the breadwinner, so I've got to try and stay positive and focused for as long as I can. They're depending on me. And this man talks about the responsibility to, despite being in too much pain to go to work, he still needs to be the provider. I did consider giving up work when I was really bad, but when you've got, my daughter was in university, my son was still at school, you haven't really got a lot of choice but to carry on, go through the pain, loads of painkillers, and carry on. So this impact leads nicely into mental health, the impact on mental health and well-being. So I think we all by now, I think probably everybody in this room wouldn't say that boys don't cry, but boys in my focus groups, certainly they talked about crying and they cried with each other. So, for example, you end up in tears because you just can't understand what's going on. That's why it was so downing. It came on so fast, you didn't know where it was going to stop. I used to cry every night. Every night I used to cry. I used to go sit and cry. I still get that every so often, maybe once a week, once a month, once every 3 months, and then I cry myself to sleep. So they talked very, very openly about the impact that their condition had on their mental health. And this was in focus groups with other men, and they supported each other and they had tears together in those groups sometimes. It wasn't just sadness. So low mood invites more sympathy than anger, but men will sometimes low mood and depression can come out as anger. Also, this can be a side effect of prostate cancer treatments, the hormone effects. And this seemed a real impact on men. Some of them talked about having lost their jobs because they'd lost their temper in the workplace, for example. I found that I've got massively enraged in a spontaneous way. Something triggered it, and it's like a step function. My temperament, all of a sudden, there's this almighty change. I wanted to hit someone. At another time, I wanted to choke someone to death. I just controlled it, and it subsided. So he talked about being able to control it, but they didn't always find it was easy to control. And just a trigger warning for the next quote before I put it up, which mentions suicide. So some men talked about not intending to commit suicide or to die by suicide, but knowing that the option was there enabled them to feel in control, at least to have control over whether you kill yourself or not. It's sort of the last thing that you've got control over. And they also talked about the stigma of not necessarily feeling able to talk about this or to come forward. I've often heard people say, get a grip, don't make such a fuss. This paper particularly focuses on men in African American communities, and they talked about the stigma, not just in general of being a man, but particularly within their communities. They felt, one participant said, I'll be labelled as crazy like those white people. All they're going to do is give me some medication and people are going to tease me. And interestingly, a lot of the time when they did talk about depression, they talked about it in this sort of removed, I'm a medic, so I'm talking about depression in the medical sense. So they were very clear to talk about, this is a chemical imbalance. This is wires not working right in my brain. They removed the emotions from it often. So it was they really made the language more clinical when talking about depression. So then there's also a chapter on self-image and body image. Just got one slide on this. So we often maybe associate body image more with women than men, but since we've got Fabio here from one of Fabio's studies, one of the things that I think is pretty unfair is that because you're a man, you shouldn't really care so much about your appearance, and yet, of course, they do. I found in my focus groups, interestingly, although men with systemic sclerosis do get facial sort of visible signs of the condition, they were much more concerned with their bodies changing, so losing the muscle mass and the that sort of masculine body. So I'm 1/2 to 3/4 of a stone lighter than my fighting weight, if you like. So that would be muscle loss, definitely. I look in the mirror and I think, who's that? And they also felt an impact on their self-image, particularly when they when their bodies appeared less masculine, or in this example, because they'd been diagnosed with something that's usually thought of as a woman's condition. So I thought people would consider me less of a man because I had breast cancer. I've also included a chapter on sex and intimacy. So across the literature, I would say that sort of the key concern for most men was sex and intimacy. The only exception to this was in prostate cancer, where men were prioritizing their mortality over sex and intimacy because they accepted life-saving treatment at the potential expense of that. So resoundingly, if they were asked about it, which lots of studies didn't, but if they were asked, men were really keen to sort out their sex and intimacy issues. If there's one thing I could fix while I'm still only 60, I've got a few years left, I'd like to fix that. And bear in mind, this is a man with a life-limiting condition, and still this is the priority. And it'd be really easy to think, okay, yeah, of course, men are always thinking about sex, but the worries for them seem to be, you worry about the woman thinking, is she okay with this? It was their relationships that they really cared about. British men talked about this in a much more flippant way. They talked about, oh, what if she goes off with the milkman, kind of, for example. But here is a much more emotive quote around that same worry. She might look elsewhere to satisfy her needs. I worry about it every day because I don't know how I'd cope without her. There is also a masculinity issue to this. Very interestingly, a study with gay men found that when they talked about erectile dysfunction, it was seen as there's something wrong with me. Whereas when they talked about pain during anal sex, it isn't your fault, these things just happen. So there was very much a sort of packaging around the loss of masculinity that also came with these issues. However, the majority of men said that this wasn't talked about. Their clinicians didn't talk about it with them. Systemic sclerosis affects blood flow to the extremities, which obviously is likely to cause erectile dysfunction. And this is the interaction in the focus group around that. I had to figure it out through my own self-study. I don't remember it ever being brought up, not that I recall. It wasn't brought up for myself. And I wasn't saying much about it at the time either, to be honest. You know, I was not ready to open up about it. And as this, I think this quote puts it really nicely from this Swedish study, not even a hint of a question on your sex life, on erections or anything. I think that's crap. Healthcare professionals would often be, would worry about bringing it up. They'd worry about embarrassing their patients, but men very much want to be asked. And they tended to say they didn't mind being asked if it wasn't an issue, but they just wanted to be asked. So then moving on to mortality, if anyone's looking for a gap in the literature, mortality is your area. There's very little. So there's literature on men at end of life and in hospice care, but there's very little on men with long-term conditions on mortality. The men talked about very much focused on the things that they felt that they would miss when they were no longer around. I think about it in terms of what I will or maybe not be able to do with my daughter, that before I had her, before I got sick, I was like, when I have a child, these are the types of things I want to do with them. The next quote, every time I edited this chapter, it gets me every single time. So I'll see whether I'll be able to read it out. If not, I'll leave you to read it. There's a paper on young men with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and the majority of them talked about what their clinicians got wrong in talking about mortality. They didn't make them feel comfortable enough to talk about it, or they tried to talk about it in front of their parents, and they wanted to protect their parents from talking about these things. This man talks about what his clinician got right. He asks about my life, and that's the difference. It means you don't mind talking about anything, really. If you can talk about how you live, then you can talk about dying. It's difficult to talk about your death to someone who may not be that interested in your life. And I think that's such an important quote for any clinician to take home is, you know, it's not just about the condition. They want you to engage in who they are as a person. And then just to lighten the mood, a lot of men used kind of banter and humour to talk about these, the sort of dark humour to talk about these difficult topics, particularly British men. So, you know, in terms of talking to their friends, he says, look, if you don't make it, can I have your new drill? Now, when I tell women that, they're horrified, but that's the way blokes deal with it. And this man making light of it in the focus groups, so sort of channeling the great late Maggie Smith, says, I've stopped buying green bananas, with the implication being he won't be around to see them ripen. So coping and self-management. Men were really good at finding ways around, finding different different ways of doing the things to still be able to do what they wanted to. I couldn't pull the clutch lever on the motorbike, so I made one that was an inch longer. You've got to find ways. And I think men also get a bit of a bad rap for not looking after their health, but actually they seem to take quite calculated risks. So they might do something that would cause them pain the next day, but they had made that decision. They knew what they were doing. It was worth it. When you go skiing, it was worth it. Even though sometimes you're coming off the slopes and you're almost crying with the pain if you've got really cold, you still want to do it because there'll come a time when you really can't do it. Just wanted to briefly flag up the idea of gamification. So the idea that if you make things into a game, people are more likely to engage with it. And men did they focused on things like their numbers. And they also really enjoyed a kind of competitive element. So, you know, in support groups, things like competing around step counts or that sort of thing. But the sort of focus on numbers is a potential, I think, for a kind of real into engaging men with their health. So rather than talking in this kind of broad, kind of fluffy way around health and well-being, but actually engaging them with their biomarkers and, you know, getting them to look at how their behaviour is changing their numbers, seem to be a kind of great way of engaging men in their self-management. And then the other issue I wanted to flag is that men tend to, their key sources of support were often their wives, but they would still mask a certain element of the full impact because they wanted to protect them. So in terms of talking to the wife, I can't do it anymore. I can't burden her anymore. A lot of the time, reflux hits me at night and she says, are you okay? Yeah, I'm just going to go down and get some milk. I run down and I'm like bawling out my eyes, feels like a dragon, the acid's just coming up my throat. And I go up the stairs and she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. I just had a bit of milk, I'm all right. I can't tell her how I feel. I can't tell her how it is. So if this is their key source of support and they're still not able to open up, then it's so important that we are providing space in clinics or in spaces like Talk Club for men to be able to talk in a safe environment. Briefly to touch on help seeking, I think often there is this, every time I say that I work in men's health, I get that, oh yeah, men are rubbish at going to the doctors, aren't they? And this is one of my favourite studies to sort of highlight that actually men aren't as bad as everyone seems to think they are. So the big graph shows colorectal cancer, and then we've got lung cancer and malignant melanoma, where you can see the same patterns across the graphs. So these researchers identified men and women who had been diagnosed with cancer and then looked at their GP visits for 2 years prior to being diagnosed. You've got women represented by the green circles and men are the blue triangles, and you can see their patterns are identical. So for 2 years prior to being diagnosed with these 3 major cancers, there is no difference in presentation to primary care between men and women. So is it that men aren't as bad as we think, or is it that that actually men and women are both a bit rubbish? But men are actually no worse than women at identifying in symptoms for big issues and then seeking help. Where they differ is the reasons that they'll delay help seeking, and that's why it's important to understand those reasons, because they'll tailor support appropriately as encouraging men or women to seek help. So men were more likely to downplay their symptoms. And there was a lot of checking, would other men go to the doctor if they had this, and were much more likely to be encouraged by a loved one or another man saying, should you think about going to the doctor? I'd just seen a spot on the x-ray, a little bitty spot, and I'm a big man, it'd take a lot to pull me down as a man with lung cancer. And I also wanted to flag this quote, because often there's the sort of well-meaning publicity narrative of men aren't sort of taken seriously when they go to the doctor is seen as a sort of push for the doctors to do better at supporting men, but actually men are listening to that narrative, and that can also be off-putting. There's been so much publicity on how males are not taken seriously when they admit how they're feeling, so this puts me off going. And you could flip that, because we often say that doctors don't listen to women too, and how much of this is perpetuating narratives. So the last chapter I'm going to talk through is support. So there is this sort of idea that men don't really talk about their health, but people, as this quote says, people say men don't talk. Well, that's bullshit. Once they're in the right space, you can't shut them up. And I'm sure Ben will agree with me on this. So when I asked the men in my focus groups what it was like taking part in a talking group, they said they were really positive. Other people don't understand how it gets to you, whereas you can recognise everything that everybody here is saying because you've been through it. Just to sit down with a bunch of other men, that's awesome. This is awesome to me. But when I said, would you come to something like this for part of your care? I got, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure what I'd say in a group. I'm just here to help you. This is for research. Just speaking to other people with the same complaint, I can't see what good that would do. So simply offering a support group doesn't quite get to, once they're there, they like it. But there's a whole marketing issue, which Ben will help me out with there. The way that you market and get men into the room is a big part of the issue. Now, I would often also flag up Talk Club amongst these suggested kind of exemplar ways of engaging men, but Ben will be doing that for me. So a couple of examples. One is Football Fans in Training, which targeted men with obesity, and it completely gender sensitized the entire intervention. So it recruited men over the loudspeakers in between football matches. It got them in, it got them training in their football clubs, it got the coaches helping train them. They were encouraged healthy competitions, they competed for step counts. They taught them things like all of the labelling of things was the science of weight loss. And so they really sort of masculinized the language, and they found significant differences in favour of all of the outcome measures that they were looking at. So weight loss, body fat, blood pressure, physical activity, psychological, quality of life outcomes. So not only did they get all the positive body elements, but they also really benefited from spending time with other men. Really interestingly, because there's often the question of wouldn't that work just as well in women? And actually they rolled that intervention out in women and it didn't work at all. So they are, last I heard, they were in the process of tweaking that for women, but it was a very successful male intervention. And then the other one, which many of you might be familiar with, is Men's Sheds, which builds on the idea that men tend to support each other well when they stand shoulder to shoulder and they work side by side. So it provides spaces for men to support each other. It was initially developed in Australia, but then it got picked up by Age Concern in the UK, and you probably see Men's Sheds popping up everywhere now, or somewhere near you, I expect. So there we go, and I just wanted to leave you with a quote from my participants around this idea of men not talking. Sometimes they even surprise themselves. It's amazing. We've got 3 men here and myself, and we're talking about it fairly well for round 1. So there we go, just the shameless plug on the QR codes again. And over to Ben.
Thank you. Don't go away because I'm going to need you with text. You know I am.
Okay. I won't be far.
Standing. Thank you. That was great. Thank you. lots of stuff in there, and even just with you talking about going to doctors, I was worried. I found something. I probably oversharing here, but that's what we do at Tool Club. I found what I think was a lump on my ball, and it took the whole process for me to get in a room. Took 6 weeks. Took 6 weeks, and in my appointment was moved 3 times. So, considering if I didn't have my wife telling me you've got to go and get this checked out, and I kept on seeing my kids and sort of worrying about that, without their sort of like, and then I did walk in going, I'm sure it's fine. It's sort of like, yeah, and I'm aware of everything that comes to being honest with myself. So, my name's Ben Akers. I'm a co-CEO, co-founder of Tool Club. I'm going to tell you my story, how I got to here, not just here, but how I got to Tool Club, and the sort of the founding of it, and how I became CEO of a charity at the start. Let's see what if anything works. Yes, it does. So, hello, big hello. I try and sort of like when this is on a big screen, it gets a bit bigger. What's really important to me is I'm going to talk about suicide. I'm going to talk about mental ill health. So this is your trigger warning. Please, anyone in the room, look after yourselves. We call it airplane safety rules. You put the oxygen mask on yourself. So exits are there and there. And anyone at home or wherever this is shown, just be aware that this is what might be talked about. Statistically, the thing most likely to kill me is me. Absolutely horrible thoughts. Always gets me every time I say it. 70% of suicides are male. A man takes their own life every 2 hours in the UK. Biggest killer of men under 50. That's risen. It was the biggest killer of men under 45, but it's still, but we are still in a pandemic and it's still going up. One of those statistics, one of those men, was this beautiful young man here, Stephen Yates. This was taken when we were 16. Steve took his own life 10 years ago. He was my childhood best friend. We were brothers by another mother, matching acne, matching jumpers. We were in a pub in Kent when this was taken. And he was very important to me. I was living in Australia. He was living in Canada. We both sort of left South London. We talked on social media. We'd caught up on Zoom, etc. But I never knew how serious his mental ill health was. And when he took his own life, I'd never been confronted by suicide before. I've been confronted by mental ill health, but never by suicide. So it was hard for me. I grew up in advertising. I used to run ad agencies, and I see myself as spending lots of years selling crap to people they don't need. But I decided to work when I was in Australia, I decided to work in an ethical ad agency, an oxymoron, people may say. But the idea was to try and sort of use creativity for good, and I became a problem solver. So that was where I sort of started doing things. And then when I came back to the UK, I'd been back in the country 10 days when I found out that I got that phone call saying that Steve had taken his own life. And 3 years of therapy, 3 years of asking why. Anyone who's been confronted by suicide, you never know why. And then I got angry. I got angry by those statistics because Steve wasn't a statistic. He was a father, a son, husband, and a friend, my friend, and a very important person in my life. So I got angry, and I decided that I was sitting in a hammock in France, and I'm reading Sunday Supplement, and I picked up the airport, and I'm reading those horrible statistics. And then I'm also read in the same magazine that men of my age watch sport and documentaries, and I'm going, fuck it, I'm going to make a documentary. Am I allowed to swear? I'm reading all your code of conduct, and I was like, "Mums." So for 6 months, I made a film, and I decided this 90-minute documentary that you can get hold of. How do I play this? It's where it gets complicated. But here, this is the trailer for the film.
I'm sorry to all my family. I've been suffering from anxiety, anger for a number of years. I'm so sorry I ended up this way. Parents should never have to bury their children.
Steve Yates was my childhood best friend. He was generous, funny. You just enjoyed being around him. But on the 28th of May 2014, he took his own life.
Naturally, I think of Steve every day. You know, you know what it's on. I think of Steve, you know. When they win, I think, oh, he'd be pleased today.
And I get up in the morning and I think about him. If I'm not busy, then I'm thinking about him. Yeah, and it breaks my heart.
He was one of 4,500 men who take their own lives in the UK every year.
We refer to them as the holy shit numbers. So, single largest killer of men under 45, 1 every 2 hours, 84 a week, 75% of suicides are male.
Guys in their 20s have this really cool social connect, but when they hit their 40s, they're socially not connected. So they feel they can't ring anyone. They feel isolated.
Steve is a documentary about male mental health. How many men are hiding their feelings, don't know how to ask for help, and what they can do about it. So, for the past 6 months, I've travelled the country talking to people about this epidemic.
There's almost a kind of a slight amount of resistance actually seeing that there's a problem.
I did the typical bloke thing, what all men do when they start suffering from mental health issues. I kept it to myself.
My experience, if you come from a working class background, it's not deemed acceptable to talk about certain emotions. And I didn't have the language to talk about certain emotions.
I do get quite a few men saying, I'm only here because my wife told me to come. But I am hopeful that things are changing.
Because this is a film of hope to help men help themselves.
I wanted to empower someone else. I've got to change someone else's life.
I'm near on this coffee club. That's how you do it. Well, do it. Can't all the guys doing this. This is bullshit.
Wherever you think it is, it's not that bad. We can fix it. But we need you to try to fix it as well.
On a plane, when they tell you put on your own mask first before you put on your child's, you've got to look after you before you look after them.
But no matter how bad things get, they will get better.
So what we did was I decided that I wanted to, the way I was going to distribute this was I wanted to go to where men were. And for 6 months after releasing the film in March 2019, we put it out. I did 50 screenings up and down the country. I went to pubs, to clubs, to sports clubs, to building sites, prisons, anywhere men were. That was the idea. A bit of a pub tour, bit of a men tour was the idea. And what I was finding, no matter where I was, men were saying the same thing to me. Men were sort of saying that they were feeling exactly the same sort of isolation and a lot of the stuff that you came across with the illness side, but people were feeling that without the illness as well. And as we started doing that, a couple of the early screenings, I found that someone said, come up to me and goes, okay, you've opened me up, now what? And I started looking at all these amazing people we met, and everyone was actually just concentrating on what I call triage. Everyone trying to keep people alive, no one was really looking at prevention. No one was really looking at what Danny Sculthorpe talks about in that, the rugby player, the one in the yellow shirt. He introduced me to this idea of mental fitness. So as soon as he said mental fitness, something really came into my head. And I was like, what if we start looking at a preventative space, something that's almost cool to be part of, but keeps you mentally fit? And with other founders, with other members from the film, Gav did the music, who's my co-CEO and also a therapist. Neil was one of the producers. My wife was one of the producers. Tom and Blue are in it. So there were 6 of us started Talk Club, and in April 2019 we founded TC. The way that we look at it is it's almost a gym for your mind. The way that you go to the gym to get fit, you keep going to keep fit. So it's a community of men to sort of like try and look after themselves. And the way they do that is just as you've seen on the flyers and as says on my t-shirt is we call it the truth question. How are you out of 10? Now this is really interesting because the way that I use this is gamification. I sort of like whatever I wake up at, I go, okay, that's my starting point of the day. But for example, most mornings I wake up at about a 5 or a 6 out of 10. My youngest still comes into our bed and kicks me in the head in the middle of the night, and so I normally wake up in low numbers. Then it's a case of how do I get my numbers higher, and how do I stay at a higher number? So, but this is the basis of Talk Club. Talk Club is all based around how are you out of 10 and mental fitness. As you can see with your flyer in front of you, these are how TC works, and even with the way that we do things, we sort of go. Here's the I've got these are an old one, but here's the way that we try and do it is try to understand how men are. So here, for example, here are the rules on how to talk. Men don't read instructions, but we need rules on how to talk. And what's the first thing a bloke's going to do with this? He's going to fold it in half. He's going to fold it in half again, and he's going to fold it in half again, and then he's going to put it in his pocket. So I'm going to use every side of this to convince you to be part of TC. Here's the video of what TC actually is. Hopefully, Caroline's going to help me with this.
What is Talk Club? Talk Club is a talking and listening community for men, a mental fitness movement, like going to the gym, but for your mind. It helps you check in with how you feel and own it. It's all based around how are you out of 10 and explaining why. So, how does it work? It begins online. Go to talkclub.org, join the online community, and find a club near you. Groups are held in private areas of public spaces where men feel comfortable, like above pubs or gyms. There are normally 8 to 10 men to a talk. The captain leads the group and reminds everyone to switch off their phones, to respect each other and give no advice. Everything stays confidential between the group. There's a talking ball so everyone can take their turn to talk, and most importantly, not talk over each other. Each man talks while everyone else listens, and then passes the ball on to the next man. The captain begins with how are you out of 10? 1 being low, 10 being on top of the world. Then try and explain why. After everyone has talked, we then move on to the second round. What are the positives in your life? What moments from the last week are you really grateful for? Family, job, hobby. Then it's what are your plans for mental fitness this week? Sleep, diet, exercise. And then before we finish, checkout numbers. What are you now? This helps us to see that we can feel lighter than when we started. But it doesn't end there. You might want to join a talk and move group where you check in, do exercise, then check out. Or at the other end of the scale, need to talk more. We now have Talk Club group therapy run by qualified therapists. Talk, move, therapy. Join us at talkclub.org.
Hi there. Did you know you can put?
And you'll never know.
You'll never know. You'll never know what you didn't know. So as I said, yes, we've got three types of clubs, if you like. So your main talk and listening groups are 2 hours, 8 to 10 men, sit in a circle, male comfortable spaces, back to pubs, stuff like that. Our talk and exercise groups are really interesting because we discovered these during lockdown. We weren't allowed to talk together and sit in a room together, but we could run together. So that's where we started running together. And then it was like, then it turned into football. And we've got these football groups and they're all over the place. We've got talk and skate, we've got talk and rugby, we've got talk and football. The possibilities are endless. And our final groups are talk club therapy. So what's really interesting with that is that if you check in regularly below a 5 and the captain spots you, going, I'm a bit worried about you. You've been checking you regularly below a 5. We referred on to Talk Club Therapy, and it's run by a therapist. And these are 6 men, 8 weeks, 2-hour sessions. And it's basically a £5 an hour. So, but we're also going to be launching one-on-one therapy early next year. Our captains, these are sort of like this is a really important slide to me. Our captains are the lifeblood of TC. We've trained over 700 captains now. We suggest sort of like 2 to 3 a group, and sometimes they don't go all the way through. But even if I've got you for an hour on Zoom, one of our trainee, Ben F runs is our head of captains. He trains people. Then you are going to be using those skills in life. But these are really, really important people, and these are what makes Talk Club work. Everything that we do is really simple and direct, down to this font was designed for us, called, oh, come on. This font was designed called, what's going on here? How do we get back up to the big one? That one there?
Yeah.
It's called Bloke. And the way that I do it, I'm lucky enough to have sort of some of the world's greatest designers at my fingertips, and we come up with this rubbish. But it needs to talk to solicitors as well as builders. So I need it to be really, really simple, and really not feeling like it's the NHS, not feeling like it's going to be you're going to be patted on the head. You need to be part of something, and the language that we use is really simple. It's sort of trying to get to the point, because people don't need advertising, but if you hit them in the right way, they'll listen to you. We now have 122 clubs around the country in 3 years as a charity and 5 years as an organisation, and roughly about 4,500 men in that community. So considering there's only 6 of us, and the speed that we work at, we're quite proud of that, and we'll keep on growing because the need's there. This is the interesting stuff for us because of how you attend and because it's so simple. When we first started this, we first started recording numbers in 2021, and we found that they were roughly coming in at about 15%. And then started sort of looking. We didn't do a big enough piece on it. But then what we found in 2022 was that average check-in was 5.9, average check-out was 7.1, and then rising to 6.5 and 7.3, and then rising to 6.9 and 7.7, which means that men are coming in and staying with us. So they're coming in like a gym. You're going to joining us to get fit, but you keep coming to keep fit. So they're checking in a lot higher, and they're going out even higher. So we're creating a mentally fit society, and that's what Talk Club was all about. Was trying to create. We're not about broke and fix it, which is what quite a lot of the mental health industry has been about so far. We are about trying to create a world where men can talk, feel vulnerable, can get mentally fit, and the mentally fit man's good for his family, his work colleagues, and society. One great thing out of this was that a woman came up to me on the street one day and she goes to me, "You're Ben Akers, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, what have I done?" And she said, "I want to thank you because my husband's now listening more at home." So now we aren't just, we should be called Listening Club, not Talk Club, because you're only really talking for sort of 10 to 15 minutes in that session. But what you're doing is you're active listening. which is which is a new skill, especially to quite a lot of men. The phones go down. You have to look people in the eye. You have to sort of like and showing empathy for each other and knowing what everyone's going through is really important. So we're teaching men to listen, and that's the one thing that I take completely out of these sessions. As I said, we want to be where men are. Some of you may have heard of a beer called Clearheads. This is a Talk Club beer. They turned me down 3 times before we got to this point. Piss off, Ben, it will never work. Piss off, Ben. I can't remember what Sam said the second time, but just leave me alone and we will try and make it. We'll try and come back with how we can make this work was the third response. It's now their biggest selling beer. It's an alcohol free. I like pubs. I've always liked pubs. We liked pubs as kids, but we know about alcohol and depression. So the rise of alcohol-free beer, it's now as I say, it's now the biggest selling beer. We get 5% sales, and I've employed someone just off Clearhead. The way that we represent it is we try and be honest again. I mean, there's a story of there's a pub in Stroud that wanted an alcohol-free beer, took on Clearhead. Saw us on the can. This looks quite cool. Rang us, emailed us. We got him trained up on the Thursday. He opened a group on the Tuesday. That was 2 years ago, and I had a conversation with someone in that group recently saying they're only alive because of that group. So I can bring it all the way back to this can of lager, IPA. So that's the reason why we can say this can save a life, because it's true, because I know the man whose life's been saved by that process. We've got a coffee. Talk Club 10 is a coffee that we've got with Wogan's, and again we get 10% of sales on this. But the idea again with this is to try and spark conversation. Take 10 minutes out. Ask yourself how you are out of 10. Men drink coffee. Let's get in their faces. So it doesn't just bring in valuable funds to the charity. It actually helps me employ people. It actually creates more conversation. This is our vets football kit. So every opportunity I will try and look at how we can rinse and rinse and rinse. We needed a football kit. I said, what if we got Bristol Rovers to sponsor one arm and Bristol City to sponsor the other? So it's called the United. The Vets team, it was brilliant when we were playing, because the hardcore City fans or the hardcore Rover fans would tape up the other arm because they don't want to be seen with this logo on them, this badge on them. But then what happened was we played. We obviously play and educate people as we play. But what's great about it as well is that we sold 200 shirts. So this again becomes a money spinner and another conversation, especially with men. If anyone's been down the Southville, behind here was the first ever Talk Club. This is the Bristol Beer Factory. Oh God, no! This is the Bristol Beer Factory. So this is created by a local artist called Inky. And what's really important to me about this is that if you look in the bottom corner, Inky, I didn't know about this until he finished it, but he put SY for Steve Yates in the bottom corner, so it's obviously very personal to me. 2 years ago, everything changed. We were quite happily going along, being little upstarts, and we suddenly got this phone call going, Liam Gallagher would like to release a song called Too Good for Giving Up. Can he do it for you? And we went, yeah, all right then. So he released this song, Too Good for Giving Up. Please watch it. It's a fantastic, great song. And we helped with a music video as well. It's a 4-minute advert for Talk Club. And but what we were finding was, well, what else can we get Liam to do? So we go, he wouldn't hold up a sign, would he? So we got him to hold up this sign. And what's really important about this, not just the 50,000 likes, is the 2,500 interactions that we had. So then suddenly they could, his fan base could talk about their numbers, and then we could follow up with them. What we carried on asking him for things to do. He ended up taking over our Twitter feed for an hour, which was quite fun. And also we went, well, what else can we get him to do? we couldn't put him in a t-shirt, could we? So we chucked him in a t-shirt. So Liam created the first of our t-shirt range. So it was just a black and white. This is called the Liam. You can see what I've done there. And Gav and I, my co-CEO, were this time 2 years ago up till Christmas, when these things went out, we were just sitting there stuffing t-shirts into envelopes and sending them all over the world. So this was a great money fundraiser for the TC, but again, a great awareness piece. Then it got really weird. So we get this other phone call going, could Tyson Fury release Sweet Caroline for you? And we went, yeah, all right then. So he released Sweet Caroline for us, and we're in the music video again. And my youngest, my 7-year-old, was 5 at the time, holding up a bub bar. So it's check it out online. But again, a great awareness piece for sort of like for a tiny charity. There's 166,000 charities in the UK. So we're fighting, and we're fighting way above our weight. So we went, okay, well, we've got Liam in a t-shirt. What if we created a t-shirt for Tyson and created one that's gold, because he's the Gypsy King. So this is called the Tyson. And his fans started buying this t-shirt. Now, what was great about these t-shirts is they're walking billboards for what we're trying to do. We're trying to sort of, they're ticking off awareness inside his community. They're letting him be, they're letting them be close to someone they care about, but also it's raising money for us. So this suddenly turned into something that we started pushing at him further. So we've got doing my nutting. Not even reading now. Okay, there you are. So we've got the pink one is with a rock band called the Idols. We've got Troy Deeney in a blue one because he's a Birmingham boy and was Birmingham City at the time. We've since expanded that out. We've currently got this is Linus, who sort of like is currently British #1 middleweight champion. We've created a one with a comedy group we're working with. We started working with our partner brands. So this is our Wogan t-shirt. So everything that we're doing is I'm just moving these things around, creating more ways to get the word out and letting people attach to us, and obviously making 10 quid on every t-shirt. So that is basically a snapshot of what TC is all about. You can see you can see the full length video of Steve at stevedocumentary.com, and please look at talkclub.org to sort of find out more about where we are. What I do after every talk, or at the end of every talk, is I want you to take away 2 concepts, or 1 concept and 1 question, or one way of talking to yourselves. The idea of mental fitness, that it doesn't just, mental health isn't something that just happens to you. We know about physical health, and when we talk about mental health, we often think of mental ill health, and that's why it's really, really important. That's why mental fitness is really, really important for us, because especially when we're talking to blokes, you can move up this scale or down this scale. You can be mentally fit. If you're mentally fit, you're mentally strong. And then the way to get there is, how are you out of 10? And what I want all of you to do, and everyone that's watching this film, is to take away that idea and sort of go, ask someone you care about, ask yourself, how are you out of 10? Use the sort of the fact that there's a cocky cockney whose screen keeps dying on him, talking about mental health, because, as I say, after every talk I do these, and this one man took my details away and emailed me a couple of days later and said he came away from the talk, rang his best friend as he was walking down, and goes like, I'm worried about you, how are you out of 10? He was about to be his best man. They were about to at the weekend, and after a long pause, the floodgates opened with a 3. And he discovered that he was about to call the wedding off. He wanted to run away, and he had contemplated suicide. But he just needed to be heard. And we all need to be heard. And what happens, especially when it comes to men, is that men don't understand that they need to be heard as much as people say about men don't talk. It's not about talking, it's about talking about the right things, but it's actually about being heard. I think we all do, both men and women, but especially when it comes to men, is that's what we're getting out of these spaces, is that men are being heard. And he was heard. So he was heard by his friend. They talked it all the way through. The man got married. He's now got a 2-year-old boy, I think, and both men are part of TC. So that's me. That's Talk Club. Thank you very much.